Right. All right. So please let me know if anyone is having any challenge logging on to the Menti. The QR code is on the bottom left. Yeah. Let me make that bigger. Yeah, there you go.
Wonderful. Thanks, Zippo, so much for projecting. And welcome again to all the participants. Sorry. So if everyone could kindly mute if you're not presenting. And we will start with one question this morning to share with us one new thing you learned yesterday. And for those who are joining with the French translation, the interpreters are interpreting the questions from the Menti that we are saying in English. They are interpreting that into French. And we very much welcome your responses in French as well. So we can begin with the question to share one new thing you learned yesterday, and we will kick off today with that. Thanks, everyone.
Sorry. Sorry about that as well. All right, there you go. Mary, do you want me to show the answers as they come?
I think, yes, I think that would be great. Thanks, Zippo. And thanks
All
everyone
right.
who's,
All right.
that may generate some further responses. So thanks everyone. And for those of you just joining now, welcome. And we've just started just briefly with a new Menti poll, and you can see the QR code that you can use with your phone, or the code that you can enter into menti.com. So we're just starting with one new thing that you learned yesterday, and you can respond in French or in English. So thanks to the 5 participants who have started, and yeah, looking forward to the other responses coming in. Wonderful, excellent. So we're getting lots of great responses. Please continue for other participants who haven't yet had a chance to answer. Please log into menti.com, or go if you use your phone to camera to zoom in on the QR code. You will be taken there on your phone. We've got 10 answers now, so lots of new things learned yesterday. So practical exercises, including for probability proportional to size, PPS, as well as looking at using PPS sampling. We also have procedures for the evaluation of campaigns and CLQAS sampling. Defining and determining both lots and clusters, which we will review some key terminology again. PPS as well is very popular this morning, and the practical work was interesting. Thank you, and thanks everyone for the great participation in that. I understood how to sample the clusters in a lot, and as well as the units, the households in the sampling unit. PPS and for CLQAS with the technique for cluster and household selection. Great, and we will review a few of those things this morning as well. So thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for participating. For those of you just joining now, we've just started with a very quick quiz on this one question. Please feel free to go into menti.com, enter the code, or use the QR code if you'd like to include another response. Otherwise, we will move into just a couple of reviews from yesterday. So the first is that we will take a look at some of the household selection from yesterday and just a quick review there. So I think Zippo, I will share my screen if it's okay.
Sure, Mary.
Wonderful. And I think I will go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and share my full screen so I can click between 3 images. So we ended yesterday with the process for using equal size sampling to go from 1,000 households down to a segment of households between 15 and 25. And Hilaire and Ketty very kindly walked us through the exercise that you see here on the screen. I did a quick practice again last night to make sure that that I could review it myself, just in going back through the slides from yesterday. So you can all let me know if this looks correct, and if anyone sees anything that you would do differently. Please, again, today, feel free to use the chat and the Q&A function. So what I did in terms of segmenting the cluster down to this final segment of households to select the first household is that we started with the 1,000 households and divided those into 4 segments to get 250. I then randomly selected this segment here and segmented again to go from 250 to either 63 or 62 households. Or I guess, you could say 62 and a half, but realistically, we're not splitting the households. And then from this selection, moved to either 15 or 16. And I didn't show which one of these was selected. Mac, also maybe walking us through how we randomly select which of these segments we would go to. I just randomly selected in my head, but do we also use random number generators?
Yeah, on the phone, but not the Excel.
Okay,
Because,
so use an app.
Yeah, everybody will be carrying a phone. The field workers will be carrying a phone. They won't be carrying a laptop. So the Robert, I think someplace in the materials is a link to the app. I don't know if Robert wants to say anything about that or put the link in the chat or something so people can even do a screenshot and show it later in the presentation. But basically, for the divisions you just showed, the 3 images at the top, you take the app and you put in what's your lowest number, you put 1. What's your high number, you put 4. And then it chooses randomly between 1 and 4. And then you also use that to choose out of the 16 what your random starting household is. You use the Excel command below where it equals 5. But you would really use this phone. You wouldn't use Excel to do that, and you wouldn't do it in advance. You do this in the field. So the field workers go to, they have 6 randomly selected villages or settlements. They make a map, they start doing the stuff in the field. So it usually takes about an hour to do this. The 3, the segments and so on and so forth. And then you finally get the first household, and then you start to interview at that point. Over.
Great. Thanks so much, Mac, for walking us through that. That's really helpful. And I think just shows that it's just really helpful for us to walk through these exercises together as well. So thanks, Mac, for walking us through those steps. And then, as Mac noted, when we use the app then to select the first household, as Mac noted yesterday, when we've selected the final segment, in this case of 16 households, we number the households and draw a map of where those households are and number them. I didn't actually draw little houses because it was late, early in the morning, actually, doing this. When your random number generator gives you household 5, you know that it pertains to the household in your map here. And then the last image is then to, if you're in a rural area, to select every other household, or in an urban area, every 3rd household. And here we had a nice question from Lidwine. But I don't know that we fully understood it. But of course, this is in a very nice line here in terms of this. But you also then, Mac, do you also then do a mapping of the larger area in terms of knowing the selection, because you go beyond just the final segment to
Right.
find the first 10 households, correct? So do you do a second
Yes.
mapping?
No.
That? Mm-hmm.
No. The team, the survey team, which is usually 2 persons, could be 1, but sometimes, for security and other reasons, you have a helper along with you. So those 2 persons, they stand in front of the door, and then they just go to the right, and then choose a house to the. They choose the next one and they skip that one. And then from that door, they continue to go to the right. And then they choose a house. So there's no mapping done, after you choose the very first one, there's no mapping done.
Okay, that's helpful to know. Then you just physically continue moving to the right. And Lidwine, you had a question yesterday about how in moving consecutively to right households, how you don't end up back at the same one. And you had a second question that we weren't fully understanding, and we wanted to take up again today. If you're there, Lidwine, could you repeat the question? You can say it in French. I will continue in English so that we don't confuse the interpretation process. Lidwine, are you there?
Ma question était, oui, je suis là, bonjour.
Hello,
Ma
bonjour.
question était, quand on est à la dernière segmentation, c'est-à-dire il nous reste très peu de ménages. Par exemple, ici, nous avons 16 ménages et nous avons besoin de 10 ménages. C'est-à-dire que si on reste dans ce segment-là, donc on tourne en rond et on est, évidemment, on ne va pas rentrer dans les 15 ménages, mais les informations qu'on va trouver pratiquement sont les mêmes informations. Alors, j'avais posé la question, pourquoi ne pas choisir, par exemple, 3 ménages dans le petit segment et choisir 3 autres, par exemple, dans un autre petit segment, au lieu de tourner dans les 15 ménages pour choisir 10 ménages? C'était ça ma question. Est-ce que c'est une erreur ou bien c'est une bonne stratégie aussi pour ne pas avoir des informations erronées?
Thank you, Lidwine. And I now understand the question, and actually I had the exact same question for Mac. So Lidwine's question, as I understand it, is that when we select the first household here, and then we begin doing the move to every other right door, if we remain only with these 16 households, we will run out of households in the final segment to get to 10. Because we're doing every other house. So every other house of 16 would only give us 8 total. But as we were discussing with Mac before the training yesterday, the final segment is only to choose the first household. And then you go to the village, and there are more than the final segment of 16. So this is where you start. But then to choose the 10 households, you look at the larger geographic area, but from that starting point. So you will, in fact, Lidwine, go beyond the 16 households in that segment. You won't remain only with those 16. Does that make more sense?
No, can you explain more, please?
Yep, thank you. So when we go, so we arrive here and we use the random number generator app to select one of these 4 quadrants. So in this case, we selected one that had 16 households. So as Mac described, we then map the 16 households here. And we again use the random number generator app to select where will we start. The first household is critical in terms of being truly random. So with the random number generator app, we select the first household in that final segment. And from there, but we know that we are in a village. If we go back, we know of these 16 households, we're actually in a village of 1,000 households overall. So we will start at that household number 5 in this segment, but then we will continue to go within the larger catchment area and may even go beyond that catchment area, kind of wherever our feet take us, actually, continuing to go to right doors. But that the place where we started is truly random, and within that segment of within that area of households. But we don't have to stay only in the 16. We find this is only to determine the first household. Then from there, we go geographically, literally wherever our feet take us. Mac, is that is there anything else I can say? We can say on that?
Yeah, I think we should draw a diagram.
Mhm.
That's if you'll put up your numbers, there you go. So at let's say you interview household 5. So the next nearest household to the right is number 9, right? And since we're doing every other, you skip that one. And you go to either 11 or 12. And you interview 11 or 12. So let's say that you choose 12. You interview 12, and then the next one to the right is 11. So you skip that one and you go to 8. You interview 8. The next one to the right is 4. You enter, let's see, we interviewed 8, we skip 4, and we go to 2. We interview 2. We go to 3. We skip that one and we go outside the final segment, as you were describing. So we, we get some, we probably will hit some houses. If we keep going to the right, we will hit some households within the final segment, but then we will pass outside the segment, the final segment. And then you just follow, keep on going, nearest right door until you get to, in the rural areas, it'll be 20, right? Your diagram shows every other, and we're getting 10. Maybe it's 19. So most of the time you'll be, as you mentioned, you'll be passing out. You'll start when you go, basically you start doing concentric circles. So some of those first households will be in the final segment, but then to get all 10, you will pass outside the final segment. Over.
Thanks, Mac. Is that clearer, Lidwine and others?
Oui, c'est très clair. J'ai même écrit dans le chat. Maintenant, c'est clair. Et ça facilite les enquêteurs de ne pas faire des informations erronées. Merci.
Thank you, Lidwine, and thanks others. And yeah, as I'm projecting, I'm not seeing everything in the chat. So thanks very much. And with that, we will move to a review of some terminology from yesterday. So we'll go back to our day 1 slides and project here, moving to the terminology that we had on slide 19. And Eliza had kindly sent these slides yesterday for day 1. So you can also look in your email so that you have these as well as references. Robert, over to you for a review of some of the terms.
I think I'll move straight into about 3 ones that came out in the discussion for us to maybe go over based on the feedback we received. So one of them was on the question on the definition of the cluster, where some people did not really understand it. I don't know if anyone would like to volunteer to just highlight or maybe just summarize your understanding of what a cluster should be. Just any volunteer? Let me see. It's already here, but I just want to have a better understanding that at least some people got it, and if you can share your understanding on what the cluster should be or what the cluster is. Should I volunteer someone? Maybe Miko is here. Miko, can you help us?
It's kind of hard because it's right in front of me on the screen. So
Exactly.
But okay, look, the way I see it, it's just basically this is like, so if you're sampling the unit, if the household is what you want to sample, the cluster is just the collection of those households that you need to interview, or to interview, or to assess, or to evaluate, whatever. So basically, again, it depends. So if your lot is the district level, and then you're breaking that lot down into the cluster. So there's a village. So then if you have the village that you've chosen your village, that's the cluster. But then you're going to have to again subdivide it into segments. Before you, I don't know, is that right?
Yeah, I think you're right.
It's just a village in this case. And I think in most cases, it would just be a village. I guess in a country perhaps like Nigeria, where it's such a big country, perhaps if you were doing a national level kind of survey, so then you probably wouldn't be taking it, your lot might be a state, your cluster might then you might then go to the LGA. For example, if you are sampling the LGA's administration, then your sampling unit is the LGA administration. So then your cluster are the actual LGAs within a particular state. Does that make sense?
Excellent, Miko. I think you are really a communication person.
Do I get a gold
just-
star?
Yeah, thanks
Rob.
for that clarification. So basically, as Miko had mentioned, just the sampling unit within that specific area. So the example we had given were whether it's being a community level or village list or the census area head facility. And Miko also had mentioned the other option of in Nigeria, where you have maybe a bigger state, you may want to use maybe the LGA or a ward as your cluster. I think Lidwin, your hand is up. Please go ahead. Hi, Lidwin, I think you can speak.
Oui, comment limiter le nombre de lots? Par exemple, si nous avons une campagne nationale, nous avons plusieurs districts, par exemple, une 50aine ou 60 districts qui ont fait la campagne de masse. Et si on considère, par exemple, le district comme le lot, quand est-ce qu'on va s'arrêter on va s'arrêter à combien de lots pour le niveau national? On a sélectionné les villages, mais on n'a pas sélectionné les lots. Sur la campagne nationale, par exemple.
Robert, did you capture
Yeah.
the question?
Yes, I think I did, and maybe I'll also defer to Mark. I think we touched a bit about it yesterday, about what defines or what determines the number of lots you want to have. And basically, I think one of it is more of a resource perspective on what kind of resource you want to have, and whether you have the resource to do every district, or you are just going to do maybe a regional level of lot where you have maybe deciding on a few regions to maybe generalize the resource. But I'll hand over to Mark to maybe talk a bit more into that. Yeah.
So Mary, can you just in
Translate
English
quickly?
give me just
The
a little
recap.
summary just to make sure I think I understand, but go ahead. If you can give me a brief translation.
Correct. So Lidwin's very good question is, we've gone through the steps for segmenting to select the first household and to select the 10 households that are needed in the cluster. How do we select, how do we decide with national authorities
Mhm.
what the lot will be, if it's district
Right.
or sub-district? How do you decide that? And how do you choose the lot?
Yeah. So as Robert pointed out, it's a resource question. So let's take some examples. If you've got 30, if the distribution or the household registration is in 30 districts, then district would be the lot level, in most cases. All you need is to do this work is a 1-2 person team per district. And they can interview one cluster per day. So they can work 6 days, or you can have two person teams per district and finish in 3 days to get the 6 clusters. So if you've got 250 districts, then that's another story, because you've got so many more teams and you may not have the resources for that. So in that situation, you may decide to do the region or the province level, as Robert mentioned. If you're at 100, then it really becomes a resource issue, whether You're going to stick with the district as the lot, or you're going to go to the province. It depends on, and remember, we're advocating you have to do this twice, once for the in process and one for the end process. So it's the resource issue that kind of drives the decision. Regarding how do you choose the lots, you don't choose lots. You don't sample lots. Every lot is included. So if you decide, it depends on what you're sampling frame. So let's say it's a national campaign. You decide your lot level, whether it's going to be district or province or region, and then you include all of them in the survey. You don't sample at that level. You don't sample at that level.
So one follow-up question then, Mac. Let's say we have 30 districts in a country.
Yeah,
We select district as our lot level. So we have 30 lots.
yeah,
We know that we are picking 6 clusters times 10 households. So 60 households
yeah.
randomly selected, cluster selected, cluster
Yeah.
sampled. Do we do for each lot, we then do 60 households times 30 districts? We do that, we select the 60 households in
Yeah.
each and every district?
Yeah, so the total sample size at the national level will be 30 times 60.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see that, for the national level, that's a pretty good sample, right? Number of
Yeah.
houses, almost 1,000. And you'll get, at the national level, you'll get very good point estimates, and the confidence interval will be pretty narrow. Even at the, you probably, if you have 30, you probably have another in an intermediate level, a province or a district or a region level. So maybe there's 3 of those. And at that level, you've got, so let's say there's 10 districts per region or 10 districts per province. So at the province level, you'll have 10 times 60, you'll have 600. You have 600 households. So that also gives you enough to get pretty tight confidence intervals to display the indicators by province or region.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mac and Robert. Robert, do you want to quickly walk through sampling frame and probability proportional to size? And then I
Yes,
can get started. Yep.
I think the sampling frame, as we discussed yesterday, is more or less the names or the list of names, places, or any other items. What is important to remember about this sampling frame is that you should not use, let's say, the registration list or the distribution list. When you use the registration list or the distribution list, in other words, you're already excluding areas that you did not cover. So if, for example, you are trying to find out about coverage and you are using the distribution list, it means that any community or any household that were not registered is already exempted from your sampling frame. So it's important to use maybe the micro-planning list, which would have all the list of communities and areas that you already want to have the survey, or maybe use a list that is at the statistical service unit that have all communities and all list of households that is easily accessible and can give you a true coverage of what you want to measure. But using specifically the list from registration or the list from distribution sometimes do not give you, especially for end process, will not give you the true coverage if you want to find issues like the percent of coverage of your IT and intervention. On the PPS, basically compared to just the probability proportional sampling, the proportional probability proportional to size gives more or less opportunity for larger clusters to be selected. So even though you are doing the probability assessment or proportional sampling, in this instance, the larger clusters have a much more probability of being sampling as compared to just doing a normal probability proportional sampling. So those were the three main points that I think came out in the last review, in the last session of yesterday for us to go over today. So I believe I have done justice. If there are any questions, please kindly put it in the chat and we can try to highlight on some of them in the subsequent slides. Over.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Robert and Mac, for helping us walk through those items. For anyone just joining, we are we've just done an extensive review of materials from yesterday. A reminder that the slides were shared from yesterday, thanks to Eliza. And please do review those. And we will now begin our day 2 material, and over to Robert to walk us through campaign assessment questionnaires. We'll have a Q&A and a break, and then our breaks may be a bit shorter, again, 5 minutes rather than 10, as we took some extra time for the review, but we'll remain flexible. And then we'll have a session by Mac looking at the analysis and response to ITN campaign assessment data. What do you do practically as the data is coming in? And looking at some different approaches for both the in-process assessment approach and the end process and third day delay, and including perhaps an energizer as well as a final participatory exercise. And then the last thing will be some training feedback. So I will, without further ado, we will go through. Sorry, I wasn't projecting the agenda for that, but yes, we did this already, so we are here. Over to you, Robert.
I still can't see the presentation.
Oh, I'm not projecting. Let me go to Zoom. Let me share my screen. Is that sharing now?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. And thanks everyone once again. And as Mary said, I will not really go through a sample presentation here, but in the Annex 14 of the procedures document, we have a sample questionnaire on the both for in-process and also for end process, and you can review maybe the sample later. And again, later on when we do the discussion on the indicators, we will show a few of the questions that can be asked. What I want to do is just to highlight a few of the best practices as far as developing questionnaires for both in-process and end process is concerned. Usually the questionnaires should be developed by the M&E subcommittee and also the task force that is in charge of assessment, just to bring the committee together to be able to think through various questions that are needed. And this should be highlighted, or this should be focused a bit more on what the objectives of the survey is and what the indicators are. So there's no one standard questionnaire that can be used for every country. The questionnaire has to be tailored towards the objective of your assignment. If your assignment or your assessment is to get more or less some indicators related to, say, coverage, then your questionnaire should be based on that. If you have specific issues or challenges within the country or within the campaign that you want to assess, then your main indicators and also the objective and your questionnaire should be tailored towards those objectives that you are trying to address. For both in and end process, as I said, we have the questionnaire, which is in the Annex 14, and you find it there. This questionnaire have been used extensively, especially for the Nigeria case. And you can just take it and bid on what has already been designed. It's also important that once you develop the questionnaire, you share with the various partners. So just to get also an understanding from them what the expectations are or what they would like to get out of this survey or the final results that will come. Normally, most of the results have to be presented maybe in a validation meeting where you present the results for all partners and stakeholders to validate the results of what you have achieved or what you have seen out of the especially end process. So it's important that you bring the stakeholders in for them to contribute to the development of the questionnaire. One good practice is also testing or the final questionnaire So once you do it, it's important that at least you pre-test it on the field before you finalize it. This lets you troubleshoot some of the issues, maybe if there are some questions that are not really well understood by especially the data collectors, maybe you did not get a very good understanding on the ground. It also helps you to determine the number of minutes and the rest that will be needed to administer the questionnaire. It's also advisable that you translate the final one into possibly the local language. So if the data collectors have a specific language they will use, it's good that you translate it. The other important thing is looking at having a mobile data collection app that is used for administering the questionnaire, especially for in-process. If you are doing registration or distribution and you want to do an in-process to get quick feedback in order to address some of the issues or key points that you identify as part of this, I think using a paper-based becomes a bit difficult for you to have a real-time or near to real-time information. But using the mobile apps makes it very easy for you to be able to access this. And there are a lot of them. There's not really Kobo or ODK. There are a lot of them depending on the country and which one they decide to do. What is important is that you need to ensure that you are setting the appropriate or the correct scripts in terms of your data, collection. If the questionnaires are not set right on the data collection tool, usually you may have issues with the results. For example, we have a question that is related to the number of people in the household divided according to children under 5, pregnant women and others. And then you have a total. If you don't set this automated way or you don't make it automatic, it becomes very difficult for you to analyze the data. Either you have a duplication of the numbers or you don't have an accurate number of people who are in the household. So it's always important that you do the right settings and then test it before you do the actual implementation. There are about 5 main indicators that we have identified as part of the procedures document, which we'll go through. Mainly, the suggestion is that you look at some of these main indicators or focus areas and develop questions along these areas. One of them is the reasons why the ITNs or the household did not receive the correct number of campaign ITNs. There are also questions on ITN use, which we may want to put in, especially during the end process, just to have an understanding of the use or to get a better picture of how ITNs are being used in order for you to develop maybe some key messages for promoting the use of ITNs. Then we have reasons why person did not sleep. As I mentioned, SBC session is also there. You can also have a few questions on SBC, especially during the in-process. You have questions on exposure to campaign messages. Also during the in-process, end process as well, you can have those questions. And the various sources of information also about the campaign are also areas that you can develop some questions to just see how your campaigns are running. A few of them in terms of questionnaires that are needed. For example, when you're doing a double phase approach, you need to, both the in-process and end process, there are some key questions that we've listed here. Again, I will not go into the details about it, but we can maybe discuss some of them when we do the indicator calculation. But during the registration, you have to focus on whether the household was registered. So once the data collectors are going to the households, some of the key questions that has to be focused on is whether the households they are visiting were registered, whether they received the correct number of vouchers. So where we have 1 voucher to 1 net, you are asking the household some questions related to whether they received the correct number of vouchers in order for them to redeem. Or even if it's 1 voucher to a household, you are asking about in terms of allocation whether they receive. In this case, if the country is using a paper-based approach and the rest, it's always important to just make sure that the correct number of ITN that is allocated is. And then on distribution too, you also want to be sure whether they receive the correct number of nets. So at the point of doing maybe in process for distribution, you're also asking whether they receive the correct number of nets. And the same can go for the end process, where after the distribution, you also want to ask around whether they were able to receive the correct number of net. The single phase approach, you can also focus on whether they receive the correct number of ITNs. Because at this point, you are not really more concerned about the registration. The main concern or the main point of focus is on the number of ITN that is being distributed to each of the beneficiaries or each of the community people. So it's important for us to set some questions along this line. No ITN use questions, fewer, and also or some SBC questions are also important to get a clear picture of what is happening as far as your campaign messages and the rest are concerned. In the document, we have a number of indicators for campaign assessment, and these are just a snapshot of some of them. They are not exhaustive. As I mentioned earlier, if you have a specific issue you want to address or you want to get feedback on, it's important that you set some indicators on them. But under this, we have household registration, a few ones that have been identified, and ITN distribution as well, the use, SBC or cross-cutting messages. For example, I think I've mentioned most of them, but for example, in terms of the SBC, the percentage of households that receive any information about the ITN campaign, households that know the correct location of their ITN distribution point, households that receive information about how to hang, use, and care for the ITNs. So these are more or less some of the examples of indicators that you can measure when you are performing or you are doing either an in-process or end-process approach. And as noted here, the indicator list is highly influenced by the type of approach you are doing, whether you are doing an in-process or you are doing an end-process, and also depends on whether it's a household registration or it's a household distribution exercise. So for in-process, again, for single phase, these are some common indicators: percent of households that receive the number of ITNs according to the campaign allocation rules. You can also find out the reasons why the houses did not receive the correct number of ITNs according to ITN campaign allocation rules. For double phase as well, there can be questions including the household that receive vouchers with ITN consistent with ITN allocation rules, reasons why the houses did not receive the vouchers with ITN allocation, and also you can include some questions on SBC. There's also an opportunity for you to explore further on some of the main issues. Sometimes using just the quantitative question do not really give you a picture of the why. Why is this happening? Why did people not receive the correct number of vouchers? Why did people not get the correct number of ITN? So you may want to include some open-ended questions and try to get a better understanding of the whys or the reasons that you get out of the various questions, whether being SBC or being under any of the major indicators that you want to assess. I think the last point I'll talk about and hand over to Mark is also the issue on SBC. I think I've stated some of or I've mentioned some of the questions already, but just to highlight that the in and end process or doing the assessment, the questionnaire should not only be limited to finding out the use and finding out maybe the coverages, but it's also important that you include some questions on SBC. And these questions are again tailored towards what you want to find out. So for example, you have questions that maybe helps you to look at the quality and reach of SBC. And one of them will be exposure to key messages. Also looking at reasons why the household did not receive the correct number of vouchers or ITNs. You can also look at reasons why individuals did not use ITN the previous night. Other questions also you can ask is the participation in terms of ITN distribution activities and subsequent use of ITN campaigns. So these are more or less some of the main or some of the key questions that can be included in your questionnaire as you develop it. Just to emphasize that it's always good to develop your questionnaire based on the objective of your assessment. So your assessment basically will influence what type of indicators you want to measure, what type of questionnaires you have to set in order to measure those indicators. So I'll hand over to Mark to walk through the 5 main indicators we have outlined in the procedures document and how these indicators can be measured.
Okay,
Over.
thank you, Robert. So you'll see the 5 main indicators on this slide. There's many other secondary indicators, but we chose this because you'll see later we use this to classify districts or lots according to basically the percentages or the proportions of these indicators. The first one is percentage of households that received any ITNs during the distribution. This is actually the easiest one to achieve high coverage levels. If there's some gaps here, then that indicates significant problems with with the distribution. Percentage of households that received the correct number of ITNs, number 2. This, of course, is the question and the indicator for the end process, or at least the distribution. If it's household registration, it would be replaced by the percentage of households that received the correct number of vouchers or the correct number written on the voucher. This is we're finding in some places that this is a little difficult. Some areas are having difficulty when they go back. They go to the households. They ask about the number of nests they received. Those households did not receive the correct number. They received some campaign nets, but not the correct number. So this is a very important indicator because obviously every household should receive the correct number of nets according to the campaign allocation rules. The third indicator is the percent of persons with access to an ITN. As most of you know, when you calculate this indicator, you take the number of nets times 2, and that's the number of persons with access. So if there's 8 persons in the household and they have 4 nets, then the percentage of persons in the house of those 8 persons with access is 100%. Next indicator is 4, percentage of ITN use by the total population, all ages. And the next one is percentage of ITN use by children under 5. You'll notice that the percentage of ITN use in pregnant women is not on this list, but it was on the previous indicator list. It turns out when you sample 60 households, generally you only have 20 to 30 pregnant women in that sample. And that's not enough at the lot level to calculate that indicator, but you can calculate that indicator at higher levels. So at the province, region, and national level, you will be able to calculate the percentage of ITN use in pregnant women. Next slide. Let's see, I've got control of the slides. I can do that. Okay, so here's the first indicator. And this is a snapshot of the kind of the model questionnaire. It's an end process. Actually, it could be could be an end process for a single phase or an end process, because it has questions about the vouchers and the number of nets received. So you'll see. So this is about the percentage of households that received any ITNs during the distribution during the campaign. The numerator is the number of households that received ITN. Let's see, D1. It's actually the number, it's not the number of households, it's actually the number of nets received by that household. And the denominator is the total number of households surveyed. You'll see A2 there. And you'll see that question has 3 different options in brown there. That whether they accepted the interview, where they were not at home, and refused. So the denominator is the households that accepted the interview, and you have data. To go back to the numerator, that's calculated based on D1. So if they didn't receive any campaign nets, then they're marked as obviously a 0. If they received 1 or more nets, then they are marked as having received a campaign net. So it's the percentage of those households that received at least 1 net. Okay. Next slide. Let's see. I'll do it here. Okay. This is the second indicator. The percentage of households that received the correct number of ITNs according to the ITN campaign allocation rules. The numerator is the number of campaign nets received, D1. And then the denominator is the number of expected nets. And that's calculated using B4, which is the total number of persons in the household divided by 2, rounded up. And if you have a cap or limit, then for example, 4, then you have to include that in the denominator. For example, a family of 7 persons should receive 4 nets compared with this expected number with the actual number received in D1. So that's how the correct indicator is calculated. Next, let's see. I keep on forgetting that I can control the slides. Sorry. This indicator is the percentage of persons with access to ITN. We talked before about it's the number of nets present in the household from the campaign from E2 plus other sources of nets, E3 times 2. So that's and of course the maximum number can't be greater than the number of persons in the household. So if you've got 7 persons in the household and you have 5 nets, if you take 5 times 2, that's 10. Well, that's more than the number of persons in the household. So in your analysis, you truncate that number at if there's 7 persons in a household, you truncate the numerator by 7. So you end up with 100% access for that household. The fourth indicator is percentage of ITN use by the total population. You'll see B4 has the total number of persons in the household. And H4 has the total number of persons that slept under a net last night. So the numerator is from H4, which is the total number of persons. And the denominator is the numerator is the total number of persons that slept under a net. The denominator is the total number of household members, which is B4. Okay, and the last one is similar to indicator 4, percentage of ITN use by children. You see B1 has the denominator, the number of children in the household, and H1 has the numerator, which is the number of children that slept inside a net last night. So the ITN use is pretty straightforward there. We adopted what Nigeria did. They split both the population and the ITN use into 3 different groups: the children under 5, pregnant women, and others. You have to be a little bit careful to make sure that they total to the total is correct, but that's what we adopted. As most of you know, in a MIS, in a DHS, they actually list the number of persons in each household, list the number of nets. So countries can decide whether they want to use this aggregate method, which is easier, or a more difficult method, which may be more precise. Also, it gives you better information about why different persons didn't sleep under a net, but there's a resource trade-off there and a complexity trade-off. Okay. So as Robert mentioned, there's a difference from the in-process questionnaire and the in-process questionnaire. The in-process questionnaire, of course, has questions about hanging and use and reasons for not using ITN during the previous night. And that is because after the distribution is finished, you wait 3 days to then come back and to give households a chance to air the new nets, and then ask them about ITN use. Whereas in process, you don't really have that opportunity. Okay.
Great. Thanks, Mac. And I see a couple of questions. Thanks, Mac and Robert. I see 2 questions in French in the chat. One is regarding the household selection. So maybe we can loop back to that quickly. And then there were questions from Ule and also, I believe, from Elua in the chat about indicator 2. So very quickly for the question about household selection, just to loop back to our review from yesterday. Jose is asking, in a rural area where households are very dispersed, is it really necessary to select every other household, or can you select every household? Is one clarifying question.
Okay, should I respond to that?
Maybe we can respond to that. And then there's the question about indicator 2. And then as Mac is responding to those, if others have other questions, please feel free to ask now. And thanks to everyone again for active participation.
So the reason they decided on every other house and every third house is that they didn't want to sample households too close together in too tight of a cluster, because those households can share characteristics, and that's not what you want. You want to get a broader representation of the community or the village. So that's why using every other and every third gives you a wider distribution than doing every one.
Great, thanks, Mac. And then the two other questions that had come in, if you could go back and look at the numerator and denominator for indicator 2 and walk through that again. There are two questions on that. And then we have one other question from Lidwine that we can loop back to.
Okay. Okay, so specifically, what was the?
I think just to walk back through,
Okay,
I think people
okay.
are not, I think there were a couple of questions about the indicator, the denominator, and the overall indicator. So
Okay.
I think just generally walking back through
Okay.
it. Mhm.
So the numerator is the number of campaign nets received, which is D1. So the denominator is about how many they should have received. So let's say that let's take two different examples. One is a household with 7 persons, and then a household with, I don't know, 11 persons. So let's say the distribution rule rule was the household should get 1 net for every 2 persons and round up with a cap of 4. So the household with 7 persons should receive 4 nets. And in a household with 11, they have reached the cap. So they also get 4 nets. They don't get 5 or 6 or so on and so forth. So the denominator is based on that calculation. So the total number of persons, the expected for the 7-person household is 4. So it's 7 divided by 2, which is 3.5, and then you round it up to 4, which is actually the cap. So for the persons with 11 persons, 11 divided by 2 is 5.5, but that's over the cap. So you go backwards to the cap. So so the numerator and the denominator should be exactly the same. If it's not the same, if the numerator is either higher or lower than the denominator, then that's the incorrect number of nets.
Thanks so much, Mac.
Yeah, we should probably have rephased this a little bit differently. It's actually a bivariate indicator. Yes, you got the correct number, and no, you didn't get the correct number. But how you figure that out is correct on the screen, the numerator and denominator. How you figure out whether you got the correct. That's correct.
Thanks so much for walking through that, Mac. I'm seeing hands raised from Eloa and Zandamela. So Eloa, do you want to ask your question first, and then we'll go to Zandamela, and then Lidwine has another question. Over.
Oui, merci. Bonjour à tous. Je reviens sur l'indicateur 2. La formulation de l'indicateur, c'est le pourcentage de ménages ayant reçu le nombre correct de moustiquaires selon les directives d'allocation. Donc, si c'est le nombre total de ménages ayant reçu, c'est le nombre de ménages pour le calculer, le numérateur. Ce n'est pas le nombre de ménages ayant reçu le nombre correct de moustiquaires sur le nombre total de ménages qui ont reçu des moustiquaires. Voilà ma question.
Thank you, Eloa. And if I understood correctly, I think, Mac, it's coming back through the last point also that you just made. So the indicator is the percentage of households that received the correct number of ITNs. However, the numerator shown is the number of campaign ITNs received. So as you were describing, there is a next step after determining this numerator and denominator, then you have to determine if that is the correct number or not according to the rules. So just to walk back through that one more time per Eloa's question. Over.
Yeah, he's correct. We need to modify this on the slide. It's a yes/no question. The number. So he's correct. We need to modify that. The numerator and denominator correctly is the formula for calculating whether they had the correct, but as he mentioned, the denominator is the total number of households. We need
Thank
to
you,
modify
Mac.
that.
And is that something, can we correct that today before we send out the day 2 slides? Is that feasible?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, great. So thanks so much, Mac, for walking us through carefully the indicators and numerators and denominators. And thanks, Eloa, for that clarifying question. And you are correct that we will correct that on the slide as well. Zandamela.
So thank you. Hi, everyone. So mine is more a curiosity rather than a technical question as such. My question is, actually it's a question. The question is, why is it important if you are dealing with universal coverage campaigns to share information about children under 5 and pregnant women? Over.
Yeah, so I think that's best for Robert and Marcy to answer.
Yeah, I think maybe I'll start first, but basically you are normally you want to find especially the ITN use according to this category of people because of the risk nature that is associated as far as under 5 and also pregnant women is concerned when you talk about malaria. So there are a key population that needs to be studied further. And that's why we normally, in most of the surveys, even for MIS, DHS, you find questions that are specifically related to under 5 and pregnant women because of the high risk burden or high in terms of the risk nature of this population. And that's why in the end process, it's always key that you have some questions that is towards use of net by under 5 and also use of net by pregnant women. Yeah.
And just to add, I think it's generally included because most programs want to report back on it. They're key populations, as Robert said, so they try to track access and service delivery among those populations to make sure that at least we're getting that far. So generally, it's a question that the national programs want to add so that they have that data to report back on. Over.
Thanks, Mac, Robert, and Marcy. We also have a question from Lidween in the Q&A that is about the question of ITN access and just that indicator was not fully clear. So Mac, could you also go back to review this indicator? Over.
Okay. So this is a common indicator that is produced when folks do DHS and MIS survey. Because the most important thing, obviously, is what percentage of persons who slept under a net, but you also want to, so the best indicator is use, and that indicator is persons, right? It's not households. So we want every person in a household to be sleeping under a net. So one question is, well, did they have access to a net? And this indicator gets at that. it has the denominator as persons, not households. So, you know, if there's 5 persons, 7 persons, 8 persons in the household, how many of those had access to a net? Well, according to, you know, work that's been previously done before, the average number of persons who can use a net is around 2. And that number has been used calculating net need for campaigns for a long time. And so that number is used in this access calculation. So each net, an average of 2 persons can sleep under that net. So if they've got 3 nets in the house, that will cover 6 persons. And then, of course, the denominator is the total number of persons. So let's say that there's 9 persons in the house. They have three nets that could cover 6 persons. So the access is 6 divided by 9. I don't know if Robert or anybody else wants to try to explain that in a better way. If there's
So Mark, I think that's it. You just explained it. Just to add that you have the numerator being E2 and E3 because it again depends on how your questionnaires are set up. In this questionnaire, there's a specific question on campaign ITN that you receive. So if the campaign was conducted in 2023, you want to find out specifically how many ITNs they received. And then there's the other question on other sources. So whether coming from the head facility distribution, from a school distribution, from a community-based distribution, or any other source of net. So this gives you, putting it together, gives you the total number of ITNs that are available in the household that could be used, or that people in the household could use or sleep under it. So the 2 will give you the numerator, and the denominator is, of course, the total number of people within the household that you have interviewed or you have surveyed. Oh.
Excellent. Thanks, Mac and Robert, and thanks everyone for the great questions. I see also a nice comment from Hilaire, noting that this is a very relevant sample of questions, and we should make sure that this tool and methodology is used by NMCPs in final campaign evaluations and assessments. Any thoughts on that? I think this is also relevant to the issue around end process and using this at the end of the campaigns as well as during the campaign activities. Any last thoughts on that, Mac, before we move to our break?
Nothing for me, thanks.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone for the great inputs again today, the very active participation. And also it was really wonderful to be able to walk through some of the questions remaining from yesterday and some of the key terminology and reviewing the slides that were shared yesterday evening with the group. We now can take our break. As we're running a little bit behind, we took a little bit of extra time to do this. So we will take a 5-minute break and come back at, let's come back at 30 minutes after the hour. So you have about 7 minutes for your break. And we will start at 30 minutes after the hour. Thanks, everyone. See you shortly. Great, thanks everyone and welcome back. And we will now move on to our next component, which is looking at the analysis and response of ITN campaign assessment data. So Mac, back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. So the main operational analysis of the indicators is the table to the right. This table is by lot, would be district, or in Nigeria, LGA. This is actually real data from Nigeria. So the lots were LGAs. And you'll see the 5 indicators at the top that we talked about. We've got the first indicator is at least one ITN, at least one campaign ITN was received by the household. The second is probably the most important indicator, that correct indicator that we talked about. The third one was the population access, and that's that indicator we just spent some extra time talking about how to calculate that indicator. And then the fourth one is ITN use. It just says use there, but it's ITN use in total, all ages. And then the fifth one is ITN use under 5. You'll see a 6th indicator or a 6th column there that says average. And it's just a simple average of the other 5 indicators. There's nothing fancy about it. It's just a simple average. So with this table, the campaign managers can judge to see if there's any gaps in the campaign by looking at this table of all the lots and then looking at the indicators and seeing what that looks like. Remember, we talked previously about coverage levels and this 3-level classification. The green, the orange, and the red. The green is good. It's 90 to 100%. The orange is uncertain from 80, or intermediate from 80 to 90%. And the red is 80% or less. You'll see there at the top, this is kind of the 3rd row. I don't know, Mary, can you put your cursor there where it says 90, 80 in red, up a little bit, right there. So you can see the break points for those 3 classifications for each indicator. In this example here, we use 90/80 as the cut points for those 3. We didn't use 90/70. You'll see later that we're going to use in another situation, we're going to show you what 90/70 looks like and why you may want to use 90/70 instead of 90/80. I think for most countries, most campaigns, 90/80 break points so that you have these 3 classification levels of good above 90 and inadequate below 80 is what you'll want to use. So this is what's shown here is probably what you'll want to use. You see we've highlighted, and then we've also used the decision rule issue. Right, we talked about that before. We talked about that yesterday. You'll see in the ranking, actually, in the order, the sorting is based on the average column. And you'll see green, to get into green, you have to have 95%. You can't have 91%. We explained that if you have 91%, then there's some probability that you're not above 90. You're actually in the high 80s, 89, 88, so on and so forth, which is why there's in all LQAS, there's the decision rule. And our decision rule was we followed the polio, which is you have to have 5% more to get into that category. All right, so you can see here that by looking at this, there's maybe half of the lots where there's some issues. And if there's some issues, especially at the bottom, you've got 5 or 6, there's a couple I see there, lot 24. The number of households that received the correct number of nets was 25%. Well, that's an issue, right? So that's an issue going forward. IT in use in lot 25 is 50%. So IT in use, yeah, 50 and 52 for children under 5. So that's an issue. Lot 26, IT in use in children is 47, 63. One advantage of looking at a table like this is that you can make the point that some of the lots really did well. You've got 4 there where the average is 95%. So the question becomes for the managers and the malaria control program is, why did some lots do really well and some did not do well? The bottom 5, maybe the bottom half, there's an issue. Whereas some of the districts or the LGAs did well. So that's the purpose of this whole thing, and to look at the colors and then to investigate those, do a desk review, certainly a desk review of why some of those districts did not do as well as the others, by questioning those districts that did well and questioning those districts that didn't do well, to try to come up with some factors that for the next time or the next campaign that's done, things could be done differently to achieve much higher coverage. I think we're also going to talk in this section about calculating the point estimates and confidence intervals for higher levels, the province and the national level. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about the reviewing lessons learned in the final report. Okay. So here we show 2 examples. One, and Mary, if you could put your cursor on the 3rd row again, that shows the 90, 80 in red. Yeah. So in this country, they use 90, 80, and in the example to the right, let's say it's a different country, they use 90, 80 for the first indicator because that indicator is really easy to reach. But for the other indicators, they use 90, 70 to color code. So I just wanted to highlight that, it's up to the country to just determine what the cut points they want to use for the three categories: the good, uncertain, and the inadequate. They want to use 95 as the cut point for the good, then that's fine. If they want to use 80 or 85 or 70 for the lower one, or even 60, then, you know, that's up to them. So this is an instance where the example on the image on the left shows an example where you use 90, 80 as the cutoff. And then if you use 90 or if you use 80 as the cutoff for the inadequate, then almost the whole table is red. And that doesn't provide much management discrimination. So in this country on the right, they decided to use a 90-70 cutoff. So now they've got better discrimination. They've got they still have half of the lots that didn't do so well, but it wasn't 90% of the lots that didn't do so well. So it's just an example for when countries think about doing this this table, that they think about what cutoff they want to use. They probably should decide the cutoff before the campaign is done, but then once they see this table after the campaign is finished, or the in process or the end process is finished, they can still change it at that time. So you can make changes at any time to this table in the cutoffs that you use. And here we give a little bit more information about the investigation. So you have one of the tables that we showed you before. Let's say that there's 12 lots that did not do well. They were in the red. So the question is, why did they, what were the factors associated with that low coverage across those indicators? You also need to look at each individual indicator, because sometimes the correct wasn't so good and the ITN use was better, or vice versa. So you look both at the summary, but also the individual indicators to give you a hint over what happened and was the cause of the low coverage. For example, in some places, maybe the urban lots or insecure areas were low. Did that explain all the differences or not? For example, if urban lots are known to have lower coverage, what about the urban lots? Were there any urban lots in the red category? Or were the urban lot or the rural, were there any rural lots in the red category? Or whether it was a purely an urban rural split, that all the urban was in the red, all the rural were in the green or the orange. So we're recommending that a desk review is done. And one of the issues you want to look at is whether the cause of some of the low coverage were data issues. The coverage was not really low. It was low because of data issues, for some reason, data quality issue. You also look for internal inconsistencies, like we talked before, to look at the high performing and the low performing, to look for internal inconsistency. You can also look at data by cluster. The analysts can look at data by cluster. That goes a little bit back to the first point about the data issues. If you've got one cluster that's moderate level coverage, but five of the six clusters had pretty good indicators, but one cluster had like 5% coverage, then that could be a data problem. It could be real, but it also could be a data problem. So the analysts would need to look into those issues. The fourth point is to triangulate the COQS data with the administrative data to see if there was, maybe some of the LGAs keep on going back to Nigeria, but some of the lots had low coverage. You could see whether they were the last to get the nets, and somehow maybe the nets ran out, or there were some problems with their distribution points. So triangulating the COQS data with the distribution point data and other types of administrative data would be a good thing to do. And then, of course, to interview the supervisors and other personnel to see if you can understand why they had some lots had low coverage. Okay, so this slide is about calculation of indicators at higher levels, at province and national level. Now, the lots are always different sizes. Let's take districts, right? As you know, the population for different districts is not the same. One district can be a much larger population than another. So when you have different sizes like that, and you want to do a calculation at the national or province or regional level, you have to weight that analysis. And so the analyst needs to have, and this is pretty easy to do because that data is available. The analyst needs to have the population of the district or the lot level, and that needs to be factored into the analysis. You can do that in Excel. For the most part, to get the correct confidence intervals, you can't use Excel. You have to use either SPSS data or R, or some more complicated data analysis program to handle complex surveys. Anytime you have clusters, any cluster survey is a complex survey, and to get the right confidence interval, you have to use one of those data analysis programs. You can't just use Excel. And that's the second point. You need to use statistical software to calculate the confidence interval to account for clustering. Under the note, the first point there, that if you get a confidence interval that's greater than plus or minus 10%, then that's problematic from a management perspective. And you may not want to use any estimate where the confidence interval is greater than plus or minus 10%. For example, if you're a manager and you see a point estimate of coverage that's 70%, and the confidence interval is plus or minus 15%, then as a manager, you don't know where that coverage is, which is why the general rule is that when you do the sample size calculation, you need to have a confidence interval that's plus or minus 9, plus or minus 10, plus or minus 7, or lower, so that the manager can make sense of that point estimate. The other thing is that with the same sample size, the same number of households, the confidence interval narrows as you get closer to 90 to 100%. So that's just a statistical fact. Just wanted to put that out there. If you're point out, for example, you're analyzing data with 300 households, the confidence, if the proportion is 50%, the confidence interval with 300 households could be plus or minus 10 or 11%. If that proportion was 92, the confidence interval could be plus or minus 5 or 6. So this is an illustration actually from data, real data from Nigeria in 2022. This illustrates this added value of the method that we use for the adjusted part of the CLQAS. Remember, CLQAS gives you data about the classification or the lot level, but this small sample survey analysis gives you really good data about above that, just like an MIS or DHS does. You'll see that in this first, I don't know if Mary, you can highlight the first column with data on the left here, the percent, yeah, that one there. That's the, if you remember, that was our #1 indicator, right? Percent of households that received any campaign ITN, and you'll see almost all states achieved really good results there. You know, the average is at the total row is 96%. The second one, that's a different story. The second indicator, that's the percent of households that had the correct number of campaign nets. There, some states were super low, but all states were what I would call low. The total is 57%. So we should strive to understand why that happened. Part of this whole process of doing assessment is understand why that happened and then try to do something about it. So I had a point about that. Oh, so if you look inside the data, 50% of the households received the correct, 25% received too many, and 25% received too few nets. So part of this whole process is to, you know, to look at that data and try to understand, well, okay, some got too many and some got too few. And one of the questionnaires in the questionnaire, one of the questions in the questionnaire is, why did the household not receive the correct number of nets? And that's really good information for the manager. The third column with data is the third indicator we talked about. Mary, if you can, yeah, there you go. Thank you. The percent population with access to ITNs. So when I saw that data, I'm thinking, well, why was the access so high, but the percent correct was low? And that is, they were retaining of the nets in the household, 30 were the old nets. So, you know, like most countries, most places, they retain nets, which, you know, it's a good thing. In some cases, you know, the best case would be that their access was 100%, and the percentage of households that got the right number of nets, campaign nets, was 100%, so they could totally get rid of the old nets. But as you know, that's not very practical. So the last two columns, the ITN use in all persons and the ITN use in persons under 5 is interesting, because if you look at the access is, you know, pretty high compared to the use. So there's some, you know, for the SBC folks and for the national control programs, this is an issue to pay attention to. You know, why were there more nets in the household, but then the use wasn't as high? So you can see this is fantastic management information for national malaria control programs. All right, so here I'm going to talk a little bit about design effect. I'm not going to explain it in great detail, but I am going to talk about, Mary, if you can highlight the last column called the design effect. Okay. So the design effect is an indicator of how much variation there was in the cluster results. That's often called the ICC, the intercluster coefficient. And for immunization surveys, that's usually 2.0. So to get the same confidence interval, you would have to, for example, you want to get plus or minus 5%. If the design effect is 2.0, that means you're anticipating the cluster survey, you're going to need twice the number of households to get plus or minus 5%. So let's say that your estimation using simple random, assuming a simple random sample survey, you need 100 households to get plus or minus 5%. In a cluster survey, you need twice that, or 2.0 times that. You need 200 households to get that. You'll see that the design effect varies by state. So there's some states like Delta had lower variation between cluster results, whereas in Kano, the design effect was 10.3. There was huge differences between cluster, lots of variation. So for example, in some clusters, the ITN use, or the population access, may have been 92%. And in some clusters, it was 42%. Whereas in the first state, Delta, the design effect is 2.7. There wasn't as much variation. For example, if the percent population access was 87%, maybe the next clusters were 82% or 79%. There wasn't a huge, there was some variation cluster to cluster, but it wasn't enormous like in Kano. You'll see there the total cluster design effect was 6.5. That means that on average, to get the same confidence interval, let's say again, let's use plus or minus 5% confidence interval, you needed 6.5 times the number of houses. So if you need 100 households with simple random sampling, you need 650 households with cluster sampling. All right, so let's go to let's look at the confidence interval column, which is, yes, there. So look at that. Let's look at Delta. It's 57 to 64. And so the total, what is the total between that is 7%. So that's the confidence interval half width is 3 to 4. I mean, if you can point to that 3 to 4. Now let's go to the number of households visited and the number of households with data. At the first two columns. Okay, so look at Delta. There was not 1,977 households visited. 1,947 with data. So the percent of households with data in Delta State was 98.5. So a very small percentage of the households were not at home or refused. The percentage, the point estimate of the correct indicator was 60%. The confidence interval was 57 to 64. So that's pretty tight. You know, that's a pretty tight confidence interval for management information. So as a manager, a national malaria program in Nigeria, they know that at Delta State, they have a pretty good understanding of where that correct indicator is. It's pretty close to 60. And that's how you use the point estimate and the confidence interval when you get this data at the province, the region, and the national level. All right.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark, and of course, Mary and Robert previously. So now we are on to the Q&A session. And Mark, we have 2 questions already in the Q&A, and I will read them out for us. Zainab is asking, is a country supposed to align the cutoff point to their campaign objectives, or just choose a cut point based on ease of reaching the indicators?
Mm-hmm. That's a very good that's a very good question. I think at the beginning of the survey, I think the cutoff should be based on the objectives and their targets. But practically, when you finish and you look at that table at the end of the day, you know, the national program needs to think a little bit from a management and a psychological aspect. You know, if you show a table that's all red, you know, is that going to affect anybody's incentive or feelings about, you know, going forward and doing better work? So I don't have a firm answer to that. But I think you should think about the 2 things, the targets. And I don't know if most countries actually set targets, you know, that they say, okay, we want the percent of households that receive the correct number of nets. Our target is 95% or 90% or 100%. And then ITN use just after the campaign, that should be 85% or 90% or some other whatever. So you could choose those cutoffs, or at first, but then if there's too many in the red, the national program might want to adjust that. Over.
Great, thank you very much, Mark. Miko is asking, is the indicator on percentage of people using the ITNs calculated the same way as ITN access use ratio indicator?
No, because in the ITN use, there's two variables. One is a set of variables with the population data. So the questioner, the interviewer says, you know, how many children under 5 are in the house? And then they ask, oh, how many pregnant women are there in the house? And then they can ask, well, what's the total number in the household and how many others are there other than under 5 and the pregnant women, and make sure that those add up correctly. And then they ask about, you know, how many, when they get to the section about ITNUs, they say, well, okay, last night you told me that there's 4 children under 5. How many of those slept under a net last night? Whereas the access is based on total number of persons. It doesn't really break up by those population groups. I don't know if I answered that correctly or understandably.
Miko?
Yeah, no, look, Mac, perhaps actually I will actually call you about this because I'm super interested in the data that you've got for Nigeria. And then I'd like to have a look at it first before, you know, we have a conversation about that. So is it okay if we get on a call sometime and just have a talk about that?
Sure.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mark and Miko. Now, Yulei, and sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, has a question here. He says, in his opinion, performance level classification should be done according to objectives. Mark, is this the case?
Yeah, it goes back to what I mentioned before, and that's, you know, that's fine. If that's what the national program would like to do, that's great.
Thank you, Mark. Then there's also a question, a second question also from Yulei, and I think this is linked to the first question. He says, for classification, is it true that the country decides what the base is?
Yes, the country decides what the classification levels or intervals should be.
Great,
Yeah,
thank you, Mark.
we you know, we provide, you know, we in the manual we talked about 90 and 80, and that's what polio uses, but that doesn't need to be a, you know, a regional Africa region-wide or international standard. It's whatever the national program decides would be their targets and objectives.
Thank you, Mike. And there's a comment here from Hilaire, and I'll read it out. I think it will be good to investigate some high coverages. You might be surprised in some cases, but the interesting point is to gather the best practices. Any commentary there, Mac?
I think that's fantastic. Yeah, that's to look at both positive deviance and negative is fantastic. It's a good management method and tool to use.
Great, and that's it. Unless anyone has any additional question, they can raise their hands.
Great, thanks so much, Sipho and Mac. And we will move now to our next participatory exercise for the day. And a reminder that worksheet 5 was shared with the group. And we will be walking through this exercise. Mac, I believe you're walking us through the exercise, but I can project a worksheet 5 if that's helpful.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll need to stop projecting these questions. And let's see, actually I can go back can have the questions small here. And
Mary, just a note that I've also pasted it in the chat.
oh,
Thanks.
great. Thank you, Zippo. Yep. Thank you. Yeah. So if anyone needs the link, and today we don't need to download it. You can use the link in the chat and you can see this as well. Also, I can try to make it a bit bigger as well, as there were some questions about that earlier. Yes, so over to you, Mac, for walking through the questions that we had for exercise 5.
Okay. So the first question is cutoff points for the 3 classification: good, uncertain, and inadequate. Now, do we expect participants to say anything here?
I think in this case, we did not set this up as a Menti, but perhaps similar to how Robert did things in the morning, maybe request if there are volunteers. So if
Okay.
anyone could, I think, tell us what the cutoff points are in this exercise for good, uncertain, and inadequate. And if no one's able to volunteer, Mac, maybe request a participant who hasn't yet spoken a lot to share what they're thinking. And again, all answers are good. We're learning even when we don't get things perfectly right. Sometimes we learn more when we don't get everything perfect. So
Okay.
back over to you, Mac.
Okay, so we'd like to have a volunteer to answer that question. So looking at this table is done after the end process. What do you think the classification cutoffs are for this particular table? And of course, if nobody volunteers, we're going to volunteer people. Okay, we've got Zainab raised her hand.
Okay, so I think for the first one, it is 90, 100, while the others is 90, 70 from what color coding I'm seeing.
Okay. So probably for the first column, it's probably, yeah, 90, 80. Okay, how about the second column? How about the rest of the columns?
It's 90, 70 because of the
Okay,
82 that I
90,
see in orange,
70.
yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Okay. The second question is, what are the decision rules to determine what the colors are?
Okay, let me add to the one I did. So for the
Okay.
decision rule, the 95 above is green. That's it's good. Even though it's 90, 80, but you have to get at least above 95 to have a green, right?
Yeah.
Then you have the 89, 80 to 89. Then less than 80 will now be inadequate.
Okay. So look at the percent use total, column E. Yeah, and then go down to Zaria here. So that's 71. And yeah, go up in that same column E. Maybe we can get married to 0.27, the 76. Yeah, the 276. So what does that indicate? So the fact that this is orange, does that indicate that the cutoff is 70 or 80?
70.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So
I think
anything, go
If you
ahead.
could just go over that explanation again for the purpose of the others, that would be great.
You want to pick up on that, Robert?
So just talking about the 90-80 rule and the 90-70 rule.
Yeah.
And maybe if you can just repeat the explanation you gave earlier at this point, I think it would be great for people
Okay.
to understand.
Okay. Yeah. So the difference between 90-80 and 90-70 is that the 90-70 is you see the lower cutoff range for the inadequate. So to achieve, so that 71 should be red because you need to achieve 75% to be in the orange category. If it was a 90-80 cutoff, then you would achieve 85% to get into the orange category. So that's the difference between the 90. Remember that you have to add the issue of the decision rule in here as well. Robert, you want to try to explain?
I think basically for the 90-80 rule, because we are looking at percent that falls within the green, which is good, and then you are looking for which percentage falls within the yellow, which is uncertain, and which percent falls within the red, which is inadequate. So for the good, when you have a 90-80 rule, it means that you have a 5% of, I don't know how to use that term, but you need to achieve 95% and above in order to be classified as being good. And then if it's uncertain, it has to be between, that is 5% plus or 5% plus the 80. So that gives you 85% to 94% before you are classified as being uncertain. And then being bad has to be below the 85%. So there's an addition of, let me say 5% on top of the 90 in order for you to be classified as being good, even though we say 80, 90, 80, what it literally means is that to be on certain level, it has to be 80% and above, and to be at inadequate level, it has to be 80% and below. But to be at a good level, it has to be 90% and above. However, because of that decision rule of using 5% added on top of the 90 and also on top of the 80, to have a good figure, or to say that Kagago, which is the first community, has met the criteria to be classified as good, they need to have 95% and above. To look at Giwa, which is on the row 9, to be classified as good should have had 95%. And because it is 94%, it is being classified as being uncertain. The same way when you look at maybe Giwa for the column C, we have 66%, and that 66% automatically puts it at being inadequate. If it was, maybe, Mary, if you can take me to the example and I don't see any of them that is inadequate under the first column. Yes, most of them are above the figure, which is inadequate. I think the Kaduna North should have probably been inadequate.
red. Yeah.
It should have been in red. Maybe there's an error over there. So that's more or less in brief how you classified each of them. Even though we have 90, 80, you realize that at 95 or at 91, 94, 92, it's still being classified as inadequate. That's because you add that 5% to it in order to classify that this particular indicator, the lot or the state or any other area you are focusing is being either at adequate, inadequate, or good. Yeah.
Okay, good.
There's
And
a
the
question
only
from balance in the chat. If maybe you can address that in the Q&A, sorry. It said to proceed with classification, are the last two columns related to net use mandatory? What is the overall risk of misclassification linked to their removal? I'm not sure. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, let's see. I don't see it in the chat.
In the Q&A, sorry.
Oh, the Q&A. Yeah, I'm not on the Q&A. So
Let me read it again, Mark. To proceed with classification, are the last two columns related to the net use mandatory?
No, I mean, you can put any indicators you want in there. I mean, you don't need to have 5. That's what we chose. The national program can put different indicators in there if they want. So including the use is not mandatory. You know, you could use 3. The first 3, which is basically just the campaign and not the use. So that would be fine as well.
Excellent, great. Thanks so much, Max, Zippo, and Robert. I think we will, in the interest of time, we will continue moving forward, but encourage people to continue using the Q&A and chat for questions. We don't have another formal Q&A, but certainly if questions come up during the next session, let us know. Mac has one more set of about 10 slides for different approaches for in and end process assessment. Mac, we have about 20, just a quick time check, maybe, roughly 15 to 20 minutes for that. And then if there are questions, and then we have a brief participatory exercise and then some training feedback. So thanks everyone for your attention today. And we'll move into the last set of slides and then those remaining 2 wrap-up exercises. Mac, back over to you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So so you'll see there in the first colored row, campaign approach, the difference between a double phase and the single phase. In the in-process LQS operations in the second row, you sample only households in the area that you worked on day 1 and day 2. So we're going to talk mostly about collecting data for the in-process for 2 days. So when you go to collect data about the in-process, it's really hard to collect data on day 1. Because what you have to do is part of the end process is to sample households in the area where the household registration or the distribution is taking place. And just operationally, it's difficult to do that on the same day. It would be nice to do that, but practically it's hard to do that. You'd almost have to work at night to sample households and do the interviews after the workday is finished, and that's not practical. So for the most part, countries are doing the day on the first day of distribution or the household registration. They're doing their work, and then the data collection, the first day of data collection is actually the second day of the campaign. So the data collection is always one day behind. Now, even though they're doing data collection, they're actually sampling households where the household registration work was done in day one. And the objective of the in process is to find problems or issues in the work conducted on day one and day two. So they're going to collect data on day 2 and day 3, and they're going to look at that information and feed that information back to campaign leaders to make corrections. Okay, so the purpose is to assess the work of the household registration or the single or the distribution, if it's a single phase, done during the first 2 days of the campaign. Now we'll talk a little bit later about if the national programs want to collect data from more than that, no problem. But probably the most important part is to collect data about the first 2 days of the campaign. Because by doing that, you can then make the corrections quickly, so the remaining 80% of the campaign will have benefit of the hindsight of the first 2 days, so that the supervisors can be informed about what went on in the first 2 days and try to correct that if they're having for example, if they're having a morning meeting with the registrars or the distributors every morning during the campaign. Okay, and we're going to also talk about analysis and feedback. And one reason why you need to put the data into cell phones, because you can get the information to the analysts, and the analysts can then analyze it and then give that information to the supervisors of the campaign for the next morning. So just for talking about this today, we're going to assume that there's 1 2-person assessment team for each lot or district. There could be 2, there could even be 3, but for the most part, the most efficient is to have, and for this example, we're going to say there's a 2-person assessment team for each district or lot. So let's say that the number of districts is 40. So there's going to be 40 2-person teams working on day 2 to collect data about what happened in day 1. Each team will, on each day, they will collect data from 1 cluster, which is 10 households. They'll collect 10 households, data on 10 households in day 2, and then collect data about another 10 households on day 3. They put that information into a mobile phone. And that data is then transmitted to a server. Now, as you know, that in some areas, they don't have cell phone service. So let's say that they enter the data one by one, starting at 10 a.m. and then at noontime and 2 p.m. If they have cellular service, they should transmit that data after each household is interviewed. Or they can transmit it at the end of their workday and transmit it at that time. If they don't have cellular, then usually where they're staying at night, that is usually on a road that has tarmac, and often that has cellular. So when they're in the settlement or in the village, they don't have cellular, they can put it in the phone, but they can't transmit the data. But when they go back to a town for sleeping, they will have cellular there and they can transmit that information. And then that information, the analyst can download that information starting at, let's say, 4 or 5 p.m. Now, how do you actually know where to do the sampling? Well, on day 2, which is the first day of data collection, you draw a map of the area covered by the household registration or the ITN distribution during the first day 1. And then what you do is you find using the maps, the crude maps, the method that we talked about before of doing the segmentation. So you start segmentation and you get down to a final segment with 15 to 25 houses. Now, there can be several different scenarios at the district level. It could be that the district is working, it's only one distribution team. They're working together, and they only cover one small area in the district on each day of the distribution or the household registration. Scenario 2 is that there could be several work areas in a district. For example, several teams doing the household registration or distribution in a district on day 1. So on day 2, you draw a map of the areas covered by the household registration or distribution, as we mentioned before. Let's see, I think this is the same slide here. Okay. So in scenario 1, you divide the areas into 4 or more equal size segments. You choose one segment by simple random sampling using the app on your phone, the random number app on your phone. If the segment is greater than 15 to 25 houses, then divide by 2, 3, or 4 equal segments and choose one segment until you get a final segment that is 15 to 25 houses. Once you get to that final segment, you follow exactly the same principles as before. In that final segment, you do a crude map, you number the households you pick using the app, one single household as a starter, and then you do the next nearest right door to then interview 10 households, get data on 10. Scenario number 2, you map or list the different areas in the district from day 1. You choose one of those areas using simple random sampling. For example, if there are between 2 and 10 work areas in a district on day 1, Then choose one of those 2, 5, 8, or 10 work areas using simple random sampling. Once you choose one of those work areas, then you segment it until you reach a final segment of 20 to 25 households. Once you identify the final segment, you follow the exact same principles as before, as the in-process example that we covered before. So there's an important role for the survey data analyst. They should practice actually and use a practice data set on how to quickly visualize and analyze mobile survey data from day 2 and 3. They should prepare an analysis plan and some dummy tables just as part of the preparation. It's better if they use a scripted data analysis app, which is Stata, SPSS, or R, so that they can run those routines very quickly, so they can analyze the data when it starts to come in. They must be prepared to work in the evening of day 2 and day 3. Data will probably start coming in through the day. They can actually start analysis, even at 2 p.m. or 3 p.m., but they have to be prepared to work till probably 10 p.m. each of those 2 nights. Because what they should do is they should analyze that information and then start pasting it into a WhatsApp channel where all the survey managers and the survey supervisors can read the results of their output, and then talk to the workers, the household registration workers or distributors the next morning on day 3. And after the day 3 data collection is done, to talk to them on day 4, the morning of day 4. So in advance, should be some communication protocol with the survey leaders and the survey supervisors to determine the modes and frequency of communication. The second blue bar says continuous analysis of incoming mobile data to detect potential household errors. That's the purpose of the in-process. It's not classification. Classification is too late. What the data analyst should look at every single record. And for those households that did not receive the correct number of nets, they should look at the reasons why. And that's part of the questionnaire. We covered that before. That's part of the questionnaire for the household registration and also for the in-process. It determined why they weren't registered correctly with the correct number of vouchers, the correct number on the voucher, or why they did not, if it's a single phase, why they did not receive the correct number of nets, and then feedback that information back. So for example, you have 40 districts, they're doing the campaign. They started on one day, and those 40 districts, in those 40 districts, they covered some area within the district. There's going to be at least 10 households. If you have one team per district, each team's going to survey 10 households. So the total number of households that you're going to collect data on day 2 is 40 districts times 10. That's 400 households. That's already a lot. And you should be able to get great data from that to determine, okay, let's say of the 400 households, 10%, and let's say this is a really good campaign, or a really good household registration. You're going to determine that 90% were registered correctly, got the right numbers or the right number of vouchers, or 90% got the correct number, but 10% didn't. So 40 households out of the 400 did not get the correct number. So you go to the data on why they didn't, and then you feed that information back to the survey managers, the survey leader, and the supervisors to tell them, we've seen these trends, not necessarily in your district, but of all the districts, we've seen this trend emerge. We've got 40 households that did not receive the correct number of nets, for example, or the correct number of vouchers, and these were the reasons why. It's possible to calculate point estimates and confidence intervals for the main indicators at higher levels on both day 2 and 3, but that's not the first priority. The first priority is to detect house by house the potential errors and feedback information back by to the campaign leaders to make corrections. A summary analysis can be written to include in the wrap-up meeting and report at the end of the assessment. But of course, that's too late to make corrections. This is this slide is here just to show you that and to remind you that in Annex 12, there's a sample protocol for the whole investigation, the whole assessment. It's got 12 different sections there. One's the executive summary, background, all the way to the 13 4 annexes. I don't know if Robert, do you want to say anything more about that?
I'm just noting that Robert is having some background challenges with his Zoom, so I think he dropped it.
Okay. Okay. Okay, I'll just
And
go
Mac
on.
will address this, a little bit in this participatory exercise. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mac. And thanks, everyone. I am noting that there are a couple of questions. We have just under 20 minutes, but maybe we could take a minute or two for the questions. One is from Lidwine, and this is regarding the tables from the session prior to this. If the color coding is automatic or manual in Excel, is it are those rules usually set up, or how is that coding done?
Can you repeat that again?
Yes. So when we look at the table of the classification and the decision rules, is that Excel, does someone manually color code those based on the decision rules, or is that set up to be done automatically, that you put in the number and then a color pops up?
Yeah, we did that manually. You can do it with Excel automatically, but we did it manually.
Okay, super. And I think that's the remaining question there. If there are other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll try to do it with time remaining, but we will move forward in the interest of time with exercise 6. So again, this is a Menti exercise with one question. So I'll leave this up for a moment. If you can click on the QR code or go to menti.com with the code that is shown. All right. And yes, then Zippo, I'll stop sharing so you can share the Menti. Is that all right?
That's all right. Thank you, Mary.
Great. Super. And as Zippo is bringing that up, so, thanks so much, Mac and Robert, for the great presentations today, and everyone who has been presenting, as well as all of you as participants for the great questions. It's really been helpful. We've really been able to dive deeply into the information, to work with the information, to ask questions, to go back through and to really understand in quite granular detail many of these key technical steps and next steps that are needed. Wanting to note that for those of us on the call, and particularly for the TA providers who are working on a regular basis with countries for overall campaign planning and implementation supervision as TA providers. We wanted to just take a momentary step back from the granular detail to say also that the objectives in doing this training were to go into as much granular detail as possible, but also thinking about the future and the way forward and where we're going from here is also that as TA providers, you work most closely with national malaria programs. And so, one of the main objectives is that you do understand this in great detail, but that you're able to work with the malaria programs as they're making their decisions. Do they want to be conducting these assessments? Some of the earlier decisions about how they will, if they will do in process or end process, if their lot is at the district level, some of those overarching decisions. Do they have the financing? Do they have the personnel, et cetera? Supporting this process of making sure that they have access to all of the tools that we've shared, so that they can look at those as they're making their decisions, looking at some of the indicators, kind of walking them through each of these steps. But you're not alone in doing that, right? That the team that's here, will continue to be resource people, and that you would be working with AMP through Robert, through Mac, and others, as well as through the M&E subcommittee at country level, and any in-country research resource partners, either through National Malaria Program partners and stakeholders, or others. So that it's important that you understand all of these details, but not that you will be totally alone and having to necessarily run everything from A to Z, perhaps over time. But, I don't know if Robert, if he has access, or Marcy or someone wants to say anything more about that. But just before we wrap up, the last question is, how would you walk through the next steps with a country, depending on the decision, the information that's coming back? But just any other wrap-up points, Marcy or Robert?
I don't know if Robert's back, but I guess just from my side first, I just want to thank you guys, all of you, for the organization of the training. But I especially want to actually thank the participants. I think, people have showed a great interest in this training. I have no doubt that we are not perfectly understanding everything. And so definitely in the feedback that we get from the participants today, it would be good to know if people want any follow-up, if they want one-on-one sessions, or if they want another sort of group session. But it would just be good for us. I see this as moving out as we head into more subnational tailoring, more, stratified intervention deployment, and really needing to course correct on those when things go right and when they don't go right. So there's going to be a lot of learning, and I think these small sample surveys for campaigns, but beyond campaigns, are something quite useful for the people on the team to understand. So as you said, resources are available, you guys are available, we can organize more training. So it'd just be really good to hear from people what they want to see out of this as the next steps. Thanks. Over.
Yeah, thanks so much, Marcy. And I think, I echo that thanks to the participants. I think it's really been a richness of this that we were able to have so many great questions from the participants and the patients as we walk through some of the material. And I think seeing together that you know, when we get into the granular detail, it's, you know, there are a lot of questions that we all have, and that we're in this together as we move forward. So definitely feel free to share either through this Menti or after the training, how else you would like to work with this material and how we can best support you. And as questions come up at country level, let's continue the conversation. So Zippo, for this particular exercise, we just wanted to take a couple of moments to ask the question back to the group, and feel free to use in the Menti, or feel free to raise your hand, or just actually take over the mic and share some thoughts. We'll just take a couple of minutes for this, because we do want to do the last training feedback as well. And I don't want to cut Zippo short on that. But for this, the specific question is, imagine that you are looking at the classification table from the first 2 days of an in-process assessment of a household registration. And you're seeing in that some households are receiving vouchers with an incorrect number of ITNs noted. So, you know, we haven't picked a percentage, but you're noticing some problems with the vouchers, the filling out of the vouchers. Thinking through what you all know of the larger campaign organization and, you know, command centers that they have in Sierra Leone, or other campaign approaches in terms of overall organization and supervision and district leadership, et cetera. What would you do with that information as in a role as technical advisor? How would you work on some of those, the in-process analysis and response? What are some of the things that you would think of doing as you're seeing issues like that? Who would you talk to, or what are some of the process steps that you might take? So feel free to put some ideas in the chat. Feel free to grab the mic, or if I see anyone raising their hand, let's just, you know, just get a couple of responses, and then we will move over to the feedback session. And we do have a couple of thoughts here. Identifying specific clusters that require follow-up and communicating to supervisors, right? So reaching out to the supervisory group. And the WhatsApp groups that are in place, so that supervisors are aware. That's a great response. Summarizing how widespread the problem is, and sending that information by telephone, by text message to supervisors to think about urgent solutions. That's great. Other groups, other folks you could work with. In addition to the supervisors, is there a way that you can reach out to, you know, whomever is overseeing the supervisors at the district level, other actions that folks might take? Jean-Marc, can I call on you? Who else might you reach out to other than directly to the supervisors? Other coordination structures. Or if
M&E subcommittee.
Yep, thanks, Marcy. Yeah, reach out to the National M&E subcommittee. Reach out to whomever is running the coordination meetings, the daily coordination meetings. If it's the district health, someone from the district health management team. Great. And I don't know, Zippo, if there are two more, a couple more coming in. Great. Oh, well done. Identifying the clusters and households with the issues and communicating to campaign managers, campaign coordinator to immediately get in touch with national monitors, local supervisors for immediate actions. Great. Yeah, identifying, are there specific lots or clusters, areas where there are, you know, prioritizing if there are certain areas that might have more, identifying the teams who could go back out, the supervision teams, monitor teams. summarizing the information and indicating suggested actions that could be taken, and sending instructions to teams to look at the cutoffs and to classify according to the indicators. So to really look at that classification and to prioritize within each lot where the issues are and share with supervisors. So a lot of great responses there, and yeah, lots of additional conversations that we can have as well. So thank you all for this rich participation as well as throughout the 2 days. And now I will turn it over to Zippo, who will wrap us up for the day and some training feedback. Zippo, over to you. Thank you.
Actually, Robert wants to close this up, so over to you, Robert.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know if you can hear me. I'm struggling with my Zoom on my laptop. I had to change my phone. Can you please verify if you can hear me?
We hear you well, Robert. Go forward.
Yeah.
Great.
So can you show that last slide? And whilst you are projecting, I also wanted to use the opportunity to thank you, Mary, very much, and also to Mark, and also to Zippo for this wonderful preparation. It's been very great working with the three of you trying to put this together. I think it's been a lot of work, and I'm glad that at least the feedback we've received so far is very positive. So thank you once again, Mark, for the wonderful facilitation, for Mary for the coordination, and Zippo for supporting all this. And also to thank all of you participants. It's been very wonderful having you. I think the participation really showed a lot of interest in this, how we answered and asked a lot of questions. Really shows that at least we are all involved in it. When we're preparing all these Q&A and the rest and the practical exercises, we're all a bit concerned about the fact that most often Zoom meetings, people may just open their laptops and maybe be doing something else, but looking at the level of questions and the rest really show that everyone has fully participated well. So thumbs up to everyone. Thank you so much. Whilst I'm still continuing to talk, this is just a form to gather some feedback, mainly on how the training went and just to help us improve on future trainings. As Mercy said, this is just a beginning. We are hoping that we would be able to use this as a basis to start a more detailed training. The way forward is to identify a group of people who really are focused on M&E to do a bit of a deep dive training. But it will be good to also at this point to have your feedback, so you can download the QR code. I think I'm going to put unfortunately, I'm not on the laptop, so it will be difficult for me to put the link in the chat, but definitely we will share it as part of the presentation and the recording for today as well, so you have access to it. But simply, they are just about each different, questions, and especially the last one on some comment, and also your suggestions on going forward on some of the things that Mercy have stated earlier. As I mentioned, the next step is trying to form a group of smaller M&E focal points that really would want to focus on some of these exercises, working along with myself, Mark, and any other person. And we realized that for the analysis, we did not really do, going into the analysis of the data and the rest to do it. And that's because the analysis will really be, in a way, tailored towards using Stata, and that takes quite a lot of time. I think for a few people like Orezi, who was involved in the one we did for Nigeria, we spent almost about 5 working sessions to do that. So for those that would be at least willing to do this and that are have a bit of a background in Stata, which I would really recommend. However, if you are a beginner and you want to, you can start maybe learning a few things in Stata and the rest. We would try to put up this group and try to have a small group that we train basically to support some of countries that would want to implement this. We already have a Stata DUFA that can help you do this analysis. So once you collect the data, and the Stata DUFA, once you understand how to use it and do a lot of these things, you can simply just run the DUFA and do analysis of the various things. I would want to also say that we intend to roll this training to especially NMCP staff and maybe partners who are also involved in this exercise. Already we've had a number of discussions, especially with some countries, also with Chai, who is doing a similar exercise in PAHO. So it's a good thing that we've all been part of this, and we would like to really hear from you what you think went on well with this training, what you think should be improved. Last but not the least, we are also planning that we would develop this into more or less a self-paced training course that will be available in the AMP website. So anyone who wants to take the course can really have access to this and just run through, similar to what we have done here. And we would be working on this going forward. So any suggestions, especially in the post-event survey, on some of the things that you think, or maybe material you think we should have improved, maybe some areas you think we should have done a bit more, that would be very, very helpful for us to get. Already, I've seen your comment, and I think I will probably send an email on this, your chat, sorry, just to try to form that small team of people who would like to focus on that. We can do a bit more of detailed technical discussions on some of the things beyond this one. As Marcy said, this is a beginning, and definitely the support available if any country would want to do any of this or any other sample surveys to do either in process or end process. We do have support available, so you can let us know and we support. Already, I know there are countries like Pakistan, chip providers have submitted. Sierra Leone, I know, have submitted their protocol and the rest for review, and we remain at your disposal to support in most of these things. So once again, a very big thank you to Mary, Mark, and Zippo, and also to all of us participants. And I'll hand over to Mary for any last words. Thank you.
Yeah, and huge thank you to you, Robert, and to Marcy for the excellent leadership from the start of this project in developing the procedures. I know this predates even the work over the last couple of years, and a lot of work that's been done over the last 5 to 10, really. So huge thanks to you and to the AMP, really, for the focus on this, and absolutely wonderful working with you, Robert, Marcy, Mac, thanks for the incredible facilitation, and Zippo, we could not have done this without you and the support throughout. It's been great being your buddy developing the exercises, and huge thanks for the slides. Many thanks to the interpreters. You have a Herculean task with all of the moving parts. So merci beaucoup. And as Marcy mentioned, first and foremost, thanks to all of you participants for all of the work that you do as TA providers, and for incredible participation. So it's been a great 2 days. We'll miss all of you and look forward, as Robert mentioned, to the next steps. Please do fill out the feedback form. That will help us, because this is the first time we're doing this. So it will be great to have everyone's feedback, and wish everyone a wonderful day. And bonne continuation, and merci beaucoup. Thanks, everyone. And thanks also to Eliza. Sorry, we couldn't have done any of this without, we can't do anything without Eliza.
Merci.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you,
Robert,
everyone.
before we end, please also save the chat and the recording.
Okay, merci beaucoup.
Merci. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. I think Zippo is the host now. Zippo, please kindly do that.
Okay.